Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today as we launch Craft and Craftivism. My name is Shannon Stride, and I am an art historian based in Montreal, where I work as the in-house curator for the Jaroslawski Art Collection. I also work closely with the Canadian craft sector as the craft content developer for the Canadian Crafts Federation. My research and writing lies in feminist art histories and increasingly in diversifying the art historical canon to better include craft and women's history with craft. I also maintain my own personal textile practice in embroidery and in weaving. I had the privilege of co-editing the ebook, The Guide to Studying the Visual Arts in Canada, with Professor Lauren Lerner in 2023. And more recently, we collaborated on these 3 volumes of Craft and Craftivism. I authored a number of the biographies found inside of them and worked closely with Lauren Lerner, Janice Anderson, and Karina Antanke to edit the collections as a whole. So this morning, I'm going to be guiding you through our process of creating these publications with a specific focus on how we compiled the list of artists to be included. This was a long and complicated process and really was the foundational stage of building these volumes. I'll then hand things over to my colleagues to discuss broader aspects of contemporary Canadian craft and specific craftspeople more in depth. So, building the list. Once the idea of publishing and gathering Canadian biographies or biographies of Canadian craftspeople was conceived, the first step in this project was to compile a list of who those artists would be. And this was a big undertaking. My colleagues, Janice Anderson, Susan Surrett, and Denny Longchamp, really drew upon their years of work in craft, their own craft practices, and their connection to the community to identify names deserving of attention. This process also involved combing through publications and magazines and exhibition catalogs to find who should be written about. This list grew, as I'm sure you can imagine, and to refine it, they decided that this publication would focus exclusively on contemporary living artists. And this was so that we would create a real window into craft today in Canada, what is happening right now. And from the outset, inclusivity was a guiding principle in this project. We wanted craft and craftivism to reflect the full breadth of Canadian craft, which meant ensuring that craftspeople from many backgrounds of marginalized genders, Indigenous and racialized artists, Francophone artists, and craftspeople from regions traditionally overlooked, it meant making sure that these artists were given their fair space. So this practice of foregrounding inclusion and looking for absence resulted in a list of really interesting Canadian artists and craftspeople. And it quickly revealed to us that many craftspeople blend their practice with their activism, meaningfully exploring themes of gender and diversity, queer experience, social justice, environmental protection, and more in their work. And that is how we came to have the title Craft and Craftivism. One artist who exemplifies this is Carl Stewart, whose work you can see beside me here. And he is a weaver based in Ottawa. He uses hand weaving to question traditional structures of power and explains that working as a cisgender queer man in the perceived feminine domain of weaving allows him to question heteronormative and gendered structures, while also celebrating and commemorating queer lives. We can see this really clearly in his recent project, Clomore, which is shown here. And it is a work that reimagines the Scottish tartan in the colors of the 67 flags of countries where homosexuality remains criminalized. So he transforms these flags, these national symbols, into symbols of queer identity, safety, and even resistance. Resistance that might be quiet or concealed in these countries, but that is absolutely present. Here is another image of this work on display. It's really striking. And another artist that we've included in the publication is Montserrat Duran-Montadas. She works here in Montreal, creating glass sculptures primarily, which combine conceptual and feminist perspectives with traditional glass blowing techniques. Her series, My Beautiful Children and Other Anomalies, responds to her own embodied experiences, transforming themes related to maternity and absence into really intricate sculptural forms, like the one on the screen. And another artist who this stage of the project introduced me to was the Mi'kmaq interdisciplinary artist Julia Rose Sutherland. Her work here on the screen, Defund the Police, was created in 2020 in response to the tragic murder of one of her family members at the hands of RCMP officers. Here, Sutherland uses quills to enact a really radical political gesture while also enacting a deeply personal act of mourning. So this is just a small sampling of the artists that were included in the list that would become Craft and Craftivism. Really, this list includes a large number of masterful craftspeople who are very practiced in their work and who use their work as a mouthpiece for activism or to explore concepts related to identity in really interesting ways. I encourage you to flip through the 3 publications because there are so many talented artists included therein. But still, even with so much care and research going into compiling our initial list of artists and the incredible talent and diversity that this endeavor revealed, gaps still remained. One of the most glaring areas of absence that begged for better representation was the North. Northern craft traditions and craftspeople have so long been overlooked by Southern institutions, galleries, scholarship, and we didn't want craft and craftivism to replicate this exclusion. So we made a very concerted effort to look to the North. With the help of my colleague Laura Hodgins, we made sure that the list included a number of artists from the Yukon, NWT, and Nunavut. Laura pointed me towards this artist here, this NWT-based artist, Margaret Nazon, for inclusion. Margaret Nazon creates really incredible celestial beaded artworks based on images from the Hubble Space Telescope. She is drawn to the pixelated beauty of galaxies and constellations and supernovas far away, and from them creates these abstract beadworks that emphasize color and texture and experimentation. She often incorporates found objects and natural objects into her beadwork, so fish vertebrae or stone or driftwood, creating works that are as tactilely interesting as they are visually interesting. This work here, Milky Way, Starry Night in 2018 is a great example of it, and I'm going to show you a zoomed in image so you can properly get to see how exceptional it is. And Meshel Melvin was another Northern artist whose work really demanded to be included. It's so interesting. Her art merges drawing and embroidery by using a industrial age French embroidery machine known as the Universal Movement Machine. This machine allows her to create continuous lines, almost like in a contour drawing style of a chain stitch. And through doing this, she's been able to create portraits of Yukoners in this large project started in 2003 called Drawn Together. She has so far captured the image, the portrait of over 1,400 Yukoners in these practices of sitting with her subjects. And she intends on creating portraits of every Yukoner. Here again is a close-up so you can see this continuous chain stitch portrait. So we realized as well at this stage of compiling and editing our list that we really needed to make sure that regional craft forms that are, yeah, specific to certain areas of the country or even indigenous to certain areas of the country needed to be given their space. So for example, we wanted to make sure that indigenous forms of doll making, that beading, that regional forms of basket weaving were all included in craft and craftivism. So here on the screen, for example, is the work of Elizabeth Dogstater, a Haudenosaunee artist who creates corn husk dolls. She owns the micro gallery and store Everything Corn Husk, which is located in the Six Nations of the Grand River. And there she displays and sells everything corn husk, including her work, which has been taught to her and passed down from previous generations. This piece here is just one vignette from a large-scale installation titled Peacemaker's Journey, in which she retells the story of the Great Law of Peace. And another region of the country that we realized needed attention was the Maritimes. For far too long, craft forms refined and practiced on the East Coast, especially by women on the East Coast, have been excluded from Central Canadian galleries and publications. So here we can see a textile sculpture made with traditional knot tying, net making techniques, as well as with crochet. And this is by the Nova Scotian artist, Doug Guildford. His work explores gender and fluidity in this oceanic maritime context in really fascinating ways. He also was the first biography that I wrote for these publications, so I I find him quite interesting and really happy to share him with you. But we also have here two great examples of rug hooking, which really has been an overlooked art form here in Canada, but is so special and has been so practiced in Nova Scotia. And here are two artists, Laura Kenny and Hannah Epstein, who both have taken up this traditional art form to their home of Nova Scotia, and who have really made it their own. Laura Kenny often features this female figure, Judy, with her red hair and her red boots in her work. And Hannah Epstein has combined rug hooking with digital art and mythology to create these really fantastical modern art pieces. If you ever have the chance to see Hannah Epstein's work, I really recommend it. She's really interesting artist. Um, so by addressing regional and cultural crafts that have been historically marginalized or even ignored within the already marginalized realm of craft studies. From the very beginning of our project, Craft and Craftivism aimed to establish inclusion as one of our core methodologies. Our goal was not to create just a reference book or books, but to create a resource that reflects the living, evolving landscape of Canadian craft. In these volumes, you will encounter different styles of beadwork, northern textiles, glass sculptures that reflect the unique history of the studio glass movement in Quebec, various religious forms of stained glass, Indigenous pottery, and so much more. This project was a collective effort, and I want to acknowledge how much I learned from my colleagues and from the artists themselves. Their practices challenged me to expand what craft means to me and how we can write about it as a dynamic, critical force in Canadian art. I also want to emphasize that this work is ongoing. There are more voices to be included, more stories to be told, and more types of craft, more practices to be celebrated. Really, we are at such a wonderful time in the studies of craft, with craft finally being acknowledged more by the traditional art world, which means there's this generation of emerging craftspeople who are taking up space in ways that their predecessors were not able to. And so these emerging artists really deserve inclusion in future publications on craft. And we really hope that these volumes will encourage such further research and spark further conversations about craft in Canada. For me personally, it has been an honor to engage so deeply with the practices of so many craftspeople across the country throughout this project. So thank you so much to all of them. Thank you to my colleagues, and thank you to you for being here today as we launch this project. Thanks so much.